All right, let's turn to this now. Thousands of displaced Palestinians are making the long and painful journey back to what's left of their homes, walking through dust, debris, and memories of loss. As the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas takes hold, the world watches a fragile moment of calm, uncertain of what tomorrow may bring. The deal, brokered through the intense mediation led by Qatar, Egypt, and the United States, marks a tentative step toward a de-escalation after weeks of devastating violence, if not the last 2 years in their totality. Under the terms of the agreement, Hamas has agreed to release dozens of hostages, mostly women, children, and the elderly, in exchange for the release of hundreds of Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli jails. The truce also includes a temporary pause in fighting to allow humanitarian aid to reach Gaza's devastated communities, as well as ongoing negotiations to extend the ceasefire and prevent a return to full-scale conflict. So let's get an update now. SABC News correspondent in Tel Aviv, Blake Sifton. Good afternoon, Blake. Thank you for joining me. So give me an update of where things stand as far as the early stages of the implementation of the plan and what we are seeing on the ground in Gaza, as well as the movement of Israeli troops on the Gaza side of the fence.
Good afternoon. Yesterday, the Israeli military announced that they had completed their withdrawal to the agreed upon lines at 12 noon local time yesterday, and that the ceasefire was then in effect. Once that happened, as you say, we've seen hundreds of thousands of Palestinian civilians who had been displaced from northern Gaza and from Gaza City, either ahead of or during that Israeli offensive over the last few weeks to seize and occupy Gaza City. We saw them began moving back to the north, back to their homes almost immediately. And of course, when they left originally, many said at the time that they were worried that they would never be able to go home because they believed that Gaza City would be destroyed, as much of the suburbs were, or that they would be permanently displaced. Of course, we heard talk about that, about the Palestinian population being pushed down and kept in the south. So now that they are returning, there's a profound sense of relief. Of course, they are going back to scenes of devastation. Large swaths of the suburbs of Gaza City have been essentially flattened. The damage in the center of Gaza City, in the west of Gaza City, is not as bad because Israeli forces only pushed into that area more recently. Now, in terms of the timeline and the rest of the steps that will follow that withdrawal and the beginning of the ceasefire, the clock is now ticking down, the 72-hour clock from midday Friday until midday Monday, when Hamas must release all 48 Israeli hostages, 20 of whom are believed to be alive and 28 are believed to be deceased. There is, however, thought to be some flexibility on how long it will take Hamas to retrieve or at least identify the location of the deceased hostages, because many are believed to be buried under rubble with so much of Gaza destroyed. Now, once all of the hostages have been freed, then we understand that the Israeli government will release the Palestinian prisoners in exchange. That includes 1,722 people who were detained in Gaza, including 22 children, as well as 250 so-called security prisoners. These are prisoners that were serving life sentences in Israeli jails. They are being released in exchange. The identity of these prisoners and who would be released and who wouldn't was the subject of intense negotiations. We understand that most of the highest value prisoners that Hamas was pushing for are not being released. However, many of them that are being released are accused of orchestrating or participating in attacks that killed Israelis over the last few decades. And we understand that of those who are being released, 100 will be released into the West Bank, 15 will be released into East Jerusalem, and 135 will either be sent to Gaza or into exile abroad.
Up to this moment, what was the negotiation process? What did it look like? Because the current agreement under which these steps are being taken is framed as an implementation plan that suggests that in a way it's linked to the initial plan that was announced by US President Donald Trump, that 20-point plan. But in between the announcement of that 20-point plan and where we are now, there's been a great deal of negotiation. How did that unfold?
That's right. Well, we had President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu essentially unveil the 20-point peace plan. Then Hamas responded to it. Their response was very vague. They agreed that they would release all of the hostages, and they agreed that they would cede power in Gaza to a body of Palestinian technocrats, an interim government, although they said that that would be based on Palestinian national consensus. Now, they didn't, crucially, address the rest of the plan, which includes massive issues like Hamas disarming, Gaza being demilitarized, and other issues. And reportedly, Prime Minister Netanyahu saw that response as vague, purposely vague, as negative. But before he could reply, President Trump said it was a positive response, and he said that it showed that Hamas was ready for peace. And with that enthusiasm and that optimism, Prime Minister Netanyahu essentially had no option but to go along with it. So negotiators were dispatched to Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, and intense negotiations were held. And over the next preceding days, higher profile attendees arrived, including Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner from the U.S., the Qatari Prime Minister, Israel's main chief negotiator. And over the last few days, we had the agreement, we had the breakthrough. And so now the next few days do seem laid out, and everyone is confident that these steps will be taken, that the hostages will be released, the prisoners will be released in exchange, and more aid will flow into Gaza. But I think we need to remember that what's been agreed on now and what's happening right now is essentially a ceasefire agreement, which we've seen two of in the past, where hostilities cease, hostages are released, prisoners are released, and there's more aid into Gaza. It's great progress, and it's a major development, but it is well-worn territory. What they're trying to do now, what President Trump is pushing for, is essentially a peace plan. So this is a ceasefire, but we're looking at a wider peace plan. And in order for that to happen, intensive negotiations need to follow this step, this progress so far, and overcome major issues. As I said, the disarming of Hamas, the demilitarization of Gaza, the full withdrawal of Israeli forces as well is tied to the progress of an international stabilization force that's meant to enter Gaza and help with demilitarization. We have no idea yet who will comprise that stabilization force, when it will be assembled, and how soon it can deploy. So while this is progress at this stage in this first phase of the deal, there are massive obstacles to overcome and many more talks to be had.